nutrigenomics is certain changes if you make in a person's diet. Now, all of us are different by 0.1% genetics, right? That does render you to, you know, respond to a certain diet in a certain way. Now, suppose you want weight loss, and so do I. Now, energy restriction on certain obese individuals with certain genetic variant has helped in those people losing weight 3 times faster than any other nutrition based diet, which means targeted nutrition or personalized nutrition, like you saw in the video. What we call a gene based diet is nothing but personalized nutrition. Does that mean other kinds of diets that nutritionists give are not personalized? To an extent, they will take into consideration your BMI, your BMR, your weight, height, preferences, medical issues. But including all of this, we do take another factor, which is genetics. So there is no room for trial and error here, right? So this is something that is studied under nutrigenomics, where even changing certain macronutrient distribution can change the way your genes express. So even if you already have a health issue, let's say in this case, a person is already obese. अब उसको prevent करने के लिए there's nothing. Person is already obese. But now at this point, by changing certain macronutrient ratios on the basis of his genetics, you can reverse it. Okay. But now, what exactly is nutrigenetics? Now, you understand nutrigenomics is nutrient on your genes. Now, what exactly do you mean by nutrigenetics? It means how your genetics are going to dictate the way you eat. The easiest example I'll tell you. Some people have a gene that predisposes them to overeating because of lack of satiety. The gene involved here is called FTO. You will see it in the next chapters. So whenever a person has this gene upregulated, or the person has a variant that predisposes the FTO gene to overexpress itself, that case, at a point you realize, oh, I think I've had quite a lot. So that realization comes later on seeing the quantity of food, but internally you do not feel that satiated, because what happens is the signals that come from the brain in such people, when it comes to your leptin and ghrelin hormones, they don't act that easily. So that is a nutrigenetic effect of certain genes on your body that dictate the way you eat foods, that dictate the way you metabolize foods. Very simply put, if you carry a genetic variant that does not, that renders you to absorb vitamin B12 lesser, which means your chances of deficiency is more. So in that case, you will have to increase the quantity of B12 in your diet. So that is a nutrigenetic effect. Don't get confused. Everything what we are studying is under nutritional genomics itself. So let's understand what exactly is the advantage of nutritional genomics. When we understand what a normal nutrition diet is like, you will automatically understand the advantage of nutrigenomics. Because in this case, we are taking into consideration everything that normal nutrition also takes care of. But in this case, we go a step further, and it is based on, one size does not fit all, right? You go to a tailor, you may fit into maybe someone who has a larger size, but it is not tailor made to fit to your body, right? It may, so in similar case, if you follow a diet that somebody else has followed, maybe you lose some weight here and there, but suddenly you will gain that weight back. So this is the reason why nutrigenomics plays an important role. It is tailor made to you, to your genetics. So it is targeted nutrition, which is precise. One size does not fit all, which is why nutritional genomics or nutrigenomics plays an important role in not only preventing health issues, but also correcting your current health issues and understanding what could be at the foundation or the root cause of your current health issues, if they lie in your genetics or no. Then quick results, because there's no trial and error. We are not painstakingly giving you certain diet and then seeing, acha, theek hai, you know what, this food may or may not work on you, so we might try something else. It's not that. It is completely on the basis of what you need to and you need not follow. Disease prevention is first and foremost, of course, because it is not just about weight gain or weight loss when it comes to nutrition and diet. We're talking about taking care from all angles and all perspectives. So we're not going to focus on you losing weight while disregarding your health altogether, right? We need to take everything into consideration. To promote health and reverse diseases, best treatment for anti-aging and anti-inflammatory, because there are so many genes that dictate whether you are prone to inflammation, you're prone to sunburns, or you're prone to aging faster. So how do we prevent it? What do we introduce in your diet and lifestyle that we can help you prevent this? Contribution to public health, of course, as a large, as a whole, when we look at, if we are just taking a handful of individuals as opposed to taking an entire community, how we can promote good health on a community level or a population level, right? And key aspects of lifestyle management. Now, when we talk about our report later chapters mein, you will see that you can modify your eating behaviors. The food reactions can be identified. Certain foods you're either you're allergic or intolerant. This diet that matches you, whether it is in the terms of the ratios of macronutrients, or if certain molecules of food will help you lose weight faster, or it will help you reverse cholesterol. So this is something that you will get to know in the report itself. Your nutritional needs on the basis of your genetics and your metabolic health factors. So most important aspect today is, when we see rising numbers in diabetes and cardiac health, you realize that it is of utmost importance to understand not just your lineage, but also to compare if you carry the gene and if your lifestyle is also bad, the chances of you developing it are much higher. So after knowing that, of course, you will take those steps in order to make changes consciously, right? So all of this is something that can be got and understood through DNA tests. All right. So this was a short introduction to nutrigenomics. Any doubts so far? Like I said, these chapters are very small because nutrigenomics is an upcoming and a revolutionizing field. Although as far as the amount that you all need to study about nutrigenomics is not much, that's the reason why it's been divided into small chapters so that you all understand the concepts well. Okay, just wanted to ask you all, is my voice audible? Is it breaking? I would really like to know if in case I forgot to ask you all. Okay, so there's a question here. How much time it takes to see the result after, thank you, Sumit sir. How much time does it take to see the result after stopping that particular food? Okay, so this is something that clients have always said that, I stopped having milk or wheat after you asked me to, as per my genetics, and I saw changes within 2 weeks. So the changes, your body actually reacts pretty instantly, especially if there is something that is causing internally, internal inflammation. You won't be able to see it, but your body can detect it. So when your body can detect something, when it is taken away, that trigger, your body registers it that quickly. So the result that it shows or the effect that it shows is almost immediate. So 2 weeks to वैसे भी ज़्यादा ही है. Even within 1 week, you will start seeing changes, minor changes, like, acidity will be less, bloating will be less. You will see it within a week's time. All right. I hope I've answered your question, Divya. All right, great. So now let's move on to the next chapter. Now, this next chapter you've already studied in genetics, so there's not much to understand about cracking your genetic code. When we say crack your genetic code, what does that mean? Since we know all of us, our DNA, fingerprints, etc., are very different from one another, which is why your genetic code is very, very unique to you. Now, when we talk about codes in your body, when we know how your codes are read. Now, you all remember what it is called? How is your DNA read in sets of how many? How many bases at once? 3, right? Perfect, perfect. So it is called a codon, right? Now you remember it. Now I'll just ask you, in what direction does your mRNA read the DNA? Now, understand my question properly. I'm not asking what direction is the mRNA in, but what is the direction that it takes the imprint from the DNA? Which prime to which prime? Yes, but which prime to which prime? Because your translation, when it happens, it is supposed to happen in a particular direction, right? So when it takes the template from your DNA, it should be absolutely very true, correct? So Ashok sir and Mishti both are right. So when it comes to taking the transcript, what we say, the first thing that mRNA does from your DNA is taking a template, or it is a mirror image basically, right? Because it's a template. So that is the DNA, the strand is the 3' to 5' because the mRNA transcript is in the 5' to 3'. And why is this necessary? Because the ultimate goal is that the translation that happens later on should be in the 5' to 3' direction. And the translation and protein synthesis, where does it take place? Which is the main area? Where does it take place? All of you know it. The ribosomes, correct? So it takes place in the ribosomes. Now over here, the translation takes place. Now you need to understand that this, see, how does this look? This is how your DNA is written, right? Now even the English, the English letters, there are so many alphabets, but in your body, they're just 4. So the main difference between DNA and RNA, if you remember, is thymine is replaced by uracil, right? So your RNA basically also has just 4 nitrogen bases in addition to phosphate and sugars, okay? But in this case, when we understand how many codons it can make, since there are 4 nitrogen bases, the number of permutation and combinations that can be made are 64 codons. Each codon represents an amino acid, right? Which you remember from the previous chapters. This is just a revision. So here there is a start codon and there are 3 termination codons. So basically the ones that actually code for amino acids are how many? Ultimately out of 64 codons, how many would code for amino acids? Come on. Is it all 64? Would all 64 code for amino acids? Okay, choose an option, 61 or 64. How many of you say it's 61? And how many of you say 64? 61? Lock kar diya jaye? So everyone seems to think it's 61, which is right, because out of 64 codons, we know that there are 3 which are non-coding, right? They don't code for amino acids, but when they are seen on the strand, that is when your production of protein is supposed to halt. So the stop codons are going to say, stop translating, this is the end. So the protein is finally made. So this is what your mRNA looks like, which all of you correctly said. mRNA is in the direction of 5' to 3' because the DNA template is the opposite direction. Because finally the translation is supposed to happen in this direction. So the start codon is usually AUG, okay, but sometimes it could be GUG as well in the absence of AUG. Always the start codon codes for one amino acid, and that is methionine, okay? But now in the absence of AUG, and this is a very rare happening, in the absence of AUG, it is GUG that will serve as a start codon. But the stop codons are always these 3, UAA, UAG, and UGA. Now you should also understand what is the N terminus and C terminus. The only difference is the N terminus has a phosphate group, okay, that is attached, and here there is a carboxyl group, that's why it's C terminus. You just have to know the N terminus is 5' and C terminus is 3', because the translation happens in that direction. So you know N to C. Just remember that, because there's not much you need to understand in that. Okay, so the key features of genetic code you've already seen: 61 codons coding for 20 amino acids. Sometimes multiple codons can code for a single amino acid. You remember when we'd shown you the table in the in the second chapter, right? There are many codons that can code for a single amino acid. So in case there is a mutation that happens and maybe one nitrogen base is replaced by something else and it is still coding for the same amino acid, it will not cause any mutation. That will basically be a silent mutation or it will not make any difference to your body. But when it comes to one codon, it will always code for just one amino acid. Okay, so genetic code is a triplet and it is comma-less. There is no comma in between. It is always read. It is understood that it is going to read it in threes. It is universal, right? In all organisms, one codon, if it is coding for, let's say, serine or threonine, it is going to code like that even for bacteria, viruses, etc. All. Okay, everything that contains RNA, it's going to code the same. Polarity, genetic code always read in 5' to 3'. And initiation codon and end codon, you already are aware. Okay, so this is the chapter 2. Okay, now let's understand this chapter. What exactly is the main understanding from macronutrients and gene interaction? Now, what are the macronutrients we know? What are the macros we know? Nutrition chapter, carb, fat, protein, perfect. So carb, carbohydrates, fat, and protein are our three main macronutrients, which means why are they called macros? They are the ones that give you energy. But now, do they give energy all by themselves? No, you need something to help break them down. So vitamins and minerals or micronutrients are the catalysts that help break down macro. But of course, macronutrients take all the footage because they do have, they are the ones that are finally going to supply you with calories or energy. Carbohydrates supplies you with how many calories per gram? Let's do a quick revision. Carbohydrates per gram, kitna? 4, perfect, 4 calories. Proteins, perfect. And fat, 9. So everyone agree? Yes. So when it comes to fat, it's 9 calories per gram. Carbohydrates and protein gives 4 calories per gram. Okay. So that is your nutrition chapter for you. So now when we understand macronutrients, their ratios in our diet matters a lot, depending on the goal and depending also on your genetics. So when you look at a genetic report, for some people, the kind of diet that will help them lose weight could be a low protein and a low fat diet, while in some it is a high protein and a low carb diet. Okay, but in all cases, of course, carbohydrates will not be a high carb diet for people who want to lose weight. It is definitely going to be under the purview of what exactly a weight loss diet is like. But when it comes to your genetics, it will always tell you that a nutrigenomic diet is 3 times more effective than any other diet because it is on the basis of your genetics. Also because certain genes, whether they are expressed or no, but your predisposition to that is more. For instance, if you are more prone to having a a lower adiponectin secretion, which is intentionally supposed to reduce your fat. If there is low secretion, you would have higher fat. So there would be foods that help you in stimulating this adiponectin activity, which will finally help you lose weight and achieve the goal that you are looking for. So when we talk about macros, the specific genes that are tested, let's say in terms of certain metabolic disorders that could lead to obesity. Because when we talk about carbohydrate and fat metabolism, they are directly related to the onset of certain metabolic disorders like diabetes or hypertension, or for that matter even cardiac related disorders. Okay, so when it comes to these genes, what exactly are we talking about? We are talking about how these genes affect your macronutrient metabolism. Okay, so your macronutrient and gene interaction basically talks about certain genes that can change the way your body metabolizes fat, carbohydrates, etc. And that predisposes you to metabolic disorders like diabetes or obesity. Okay, so now these are the genes that we're going to talk about, and these are the main genes that have always been studied throughout all the research papers. You can have a look. I want to take you through FTO first, because FTO had been studied a lot, and it has been known now by all research scientists as the obesity gene. It is directly called as the obesity gene because now, every gene, it produces proteins, right? Which has been established so far. The protein could be a hormone or an enzyme. Here, the FTO gene basically is called as the fat mass and obesity associated protein. FTO gene alag hai, but it codes for this protein. Okay? Because all genes, they are Asians. Yes, they are. So not all Asians. If you Indians are prone to it. So as much as Indians are concerned, yes, Indians are prone to the obesity gene. And I'll tell you the amount of reports that we see. About 6 out of 10, or I think I will generously say it's 7 out of 10, they do carry the obesity gene. Whether the gene translates into you being obese or no completely depends on your lifestyle. So this is definitely a gene that can be prevented from being expressed, because the number of reports that I have seen, maximum it does get expressed in people. Okay, but in this case, you still have the authority or the control over your lifestyle, which is the main contributing factor along with your diet. So when it comes to the FTO gene, it produces a protein called fat mass and obesity associated protein. So it's related to obesity, right? Now, when it comes to this, for people who have this overexpressed, people in that case, they do not know when to stop eating. Like I said, it affects the satiety value of your body. So in that case, you might end up eating more and not realizing. So this happens usually when your FTO gene, okay, that you carry a risk variant in this particular gene. So in this case, what kind of diet that will be given to the client is different from someone who does not have this gene expressed. So in this case, a low protein diet or usually a low fat diet is given. A high fiber diet is usually given to give the feeling of fullness, everything that has soluble and insoluble, fiber. However, if it is interacting, let's say, with another gene that says, let's just take, for example, TCF7L2 gene, which is there ahead. So TCF7L2 is indicative of diabetes, right? But now if in case, as per that gene, you're not supposed to take a lot of insoluble fiber, so you need to make sure that you take fiber, but in the soluble form, so that you can take care of the FTO gene at the same time TCF7L2 gene. Now, the next gene is PPARG gene. What does it produce? So it is peroxisome proliferator activator receptor gamma, which is read as PPAR gamma or PPARG. So it is a protein which is nothing but a transcription factor, which is responsible for the role of a gene that's involved in fat metabolism. Also, it is involved in carbohydrate or glucose metabolism. So what happens is, whenever it is not, if you carry a risk variant in PPAR gamma, usually it leads to type 2 diabetes, right, which is insulin resistance. Your body still produces insulin, but your body tends to become resistant to the action of insulin. It could also lead to hypertension and obesity. So when you look at the predisposition of, let's say, obesity or type 2 diabetes, PPARG gene and FTO gene is always checked. Now remember, obesity, diabetes are not single gene effect. Basically, it's a polygenic condition. So it's not just one gene that's going to be responsible. It will be an average of 4 or 5 genes and the variants that you carry, which will tell you consequentially what exactly is your predisposition rate. Okay. So what would be definitely the recommendations would involve macronutrient distribution in order to make sure that we down regulate this. Also, it helps if the diet is such that is moderately high in fiber, low in carbohydrates. This could also involve a high protein or a moderate protein diet. But overall, the person needs to maintain physical activity, maintain a good lean body or a lean muscle, mass, while bringing down the fat mass, so that the insulin resistance is taken care of. Insulin resistance happens most when a person is obese, right? Your body tends to, show less effect or a low response towards insulin. So in this case, usually HbA1c is always checked once every 3 months while taking care of the lifestyle and diet. ADVR2 gene, basically it is also called as the beta 2 adrenergic receptor. Now this particular receptor is what it is there in order to receive a particular substrate. So in this case, the substrate is epinephrine. Now, if you know what epinephrine is, it is also called adrenaline, right? Usually in any situation where you are running, or for that matter even for people with asthma or certain allergic reaction, there is a constriction of your vessels that happens. Now in case of such situations, epinephrine or adrenaline helps in relaxing that particular vasoconstriction, and it helps in relaxing the smooth muscles, which is why it is usually used in asthma and allergic reactions. At the same time, people who are very fatigued. Okay, now when it comes to this particular receptor, usually it is associated with the onset of type 2 diabetes if there is down regulation of the gene. That means it is under secreted. Okay, if it is over secreted, of course you won't have any problem because your vessels would be dilated or relaxed. But when it is under secreted, that is when the problem starts. So if a person is at a risk of this particular gene, or if you carry a risk variant, these people are more prone to issues like related to bronchospasms or asthma, etc., or even allergies for that matter. So the recommendations are given on the basis of that. So a person with this particular risk allele will require at least moderate to high intensity activity. They need to make sure that a regular exercise, at least 4 to 5 days a week, will help, alongside the dietary changes, of course. Foods with a lower glycemic index of less than 60. If you see the glycemic index chart, whether it is any of these genes that we just saw, you need a moderate, low to moderate glycemic index in order to prevent the activation of these genes, if at all you carry a risk allele. Okay, ADVR3, that was ADVR2, this is ADVR3. So this is called beta 3 adrenergic receptor. Okay, now this is involved in the breakdown of fat. So if in case it's involved in the lipolysis, obviously if in case it is under-regulated, then the fat buildup will be more. If it is over-regulated, then there'll be excess breakdown of fat, right? So in this case, the associated risk is when it is under-secreted or down-regulated. Okay, so in this case, the same kind of recommendations follow for this as well, to an extent, when it comes to minimizing the intake of processed food, exercise, maintaining your blood sugar levels, getting your blood sugar levels checked, as well as your lipid profile done. So in addition to blood sugar profile, it's always necessary to get a lipid profile done for any of these genes. Now, I mentioned something called TCF7L2 gene initially. So when it comes to this gene, it is tested, or it is one of the genes that is tested in type 2 diabetes. And if a person carries a risk variant here, it does lead to the onset of type 2 diabetes as well as gestational diabetes. It is involved in glucose metabolism basically. So usually when you are at a risk of this, it also dictates the kind of fiber you need to include in your diet. TCF7L2 gene also it induces, or it stimulates the production of insulin from your beta cells in pancreas. Okay, so that also leads to understanding that if in case you carry a risk variant, the chances of you developing type 2 diabetes are more, and the kind of fiber you need to consume is different as per different individuals. Now you might say, usually, the diabetologists do suggest fiber in diabetes because, of course, it tends to delay the spike of the sugar in your blood. But as per your genetics, even that changes. So imagine something simple and something that all of us think that it is generic, or fiber hamesha lena chahiye diabetes mein. It is not that. The quantity is going to change as per your genetics. Okay. Supplements that delay carbohydrate uptake. Now, do these supplements you have to take it? Not necessary, but they do help. So the supplements that have helped in delaying the carbohydrate uptake in case of TCF7L2 gene is green tea extract, which most of you know, coffee bean extract also you all might have heard of, insulin sensitizing supplement. There are plenty insulin sensitizing supplements. One is L-carnitine as well. Then you have resveratrol. Resveratrol is a major antioxidant and it is a component of red wine, right? So these are the supplements that delay carbohydrate uptake. Now we have the last gene that we are going to talk about is FABP2. So FABP2 is loosely translated as it produces the fatty acid binding protein. Now, when you see fatty acid binding, what does it mean? It helps in binding fat so that it can eliminate it from your body, right? So when you talk about this, there are three different types: hepatic, which is related to your liver; intestinal, which is related to your gut, as well as your cardiac type. So usually whenever there is a risk variant that you carry for FABP2 gene, what is going to happen is there would be an issue with your fat metabolism. It could also lead to a change in your cell growth and proliferation. So sometimes in this case, you will have to also check for the onset, or getting your overall blood profile done. At the same time, the fiber needs to change. So complex carbohydrates and at least 25 grams of fiber daily, with 50% of that fiber coming from soluble sources. Soluble sources basically are pectins, things that are like vegetables in a cooked form, or pulp of fruits. So usually this is what is done when you carry a risk variant. Okay, so in this case, people have a lower metabolic rate, or metabolism is usually slower for people who carry a risk variant in FABP2. So when that happens, they need to make sure that they have small frequent meals. At the same time, weekly, they will have to reduce a certain set of calories in order to induce that weight loss. Okay, usually that is what we do even in any other kind of diet, but in this case it is going to be a certain percentage which will be calculated on the basis of the person's genetics as well as overall height and weight. All right, now let's move on to micronutrients and gene interaction. So we just went through macros, which was your main energy giving nutrients. But when we talk about micro, these are the catalysts that help in breaking down your macros so that you get the energy. Now, what do we know about micronutrients? These are vitamins and minerals. Why are they called vitamins? Because they are vital to your body. They help in breaking down your macronutrients, but at the same time, they serve as catalysts along with minerals in order to mediate many reactions in your body. Your body is filled with chemical reactions. So your micronutrients are very, very important. Okay. So when it comes to certain important vitamins and minerals, we are just going to see a few here. But overall, what I want to tell you is when you see the report, you will be able to understand more than 12 or 13 micronutrients that have been tested there in order to understand your absorption rate. Now, the main difference between blood test and genetic test, I'm sure you all know, is blood tests tell you your current parameters. The genetic report even talks about the absorption of certain nutrients. It does not tell you that your levels may be high or low currently. It talks about your predisposition to deficiencies because the absorption of these nutrients could be low because you carry the risk variant that could put you at a risk of deficiencies. Okay, so important nutrients like vitamin B12 and vitamin D become very important because what happens is we do not consume those, the amount that you need of B12 and vitamin D is actually not, taken through diet that easily. And vitamin D, amongst all the other vitamins, is the only one where we rely on sunlight for. Otherwise, you get it in certain food sources like broccoli, spinach, or non-vegetarian items like chicken meat, or you have liver, or you even have egg yolks. But what about those who are vegetarian, right? Even when it comes to vitamin B12, it is usually there in animal-based foods. What if a person is vegetarian and can't digest dairy? So in that case, vitamin B12 becomes very, very important to introduce either in a supplemental form if you're deficient, or to increase it in your diet alongside certain nutrients or foods that will help in increasing the absorption of B12. We always talk about vitamins and minerals, or we always talk about, we need to increase the quantity of this. But there are certain nutrients that will interact with this nutrient and increase the absorption. So wherever the problem is with the absorption, you can actually bypass that issue. So let's look at vitamin B12. It is majorly taken from animal sources. The animal sources could also include dairy. Vegetarian sources also are there, but not as many. When it comes to a risk of deficiency of B12, the gene that is involved is called FUT2, or fucosyl transferase 2. Here you have it. Location is on the basis of what arm it is sitting on and the exact location. So this is read as 19Q because it's on the Q arm, and 13.33 is the sublocation. You don't have to remember these locations, etc. They're just given for your knowledge. Okay, so in this case, when you carry a risk variant in FUT2 gene, it does not produce certain enzyme that is responsible for the absorption of B12. But in this case, there is a certain, form of B12, which is methylcobalamin, that can be taken, which has shown better, response in people with this particular risk variant. So usually, what is the type of variant that you could carry, which could put you at a risk? So you're aware that if in that location, the gene variant that you carry, okay, if in case that puts you at a risk of B12 deficiency, only then you need to make changes. Otherwise, you can just maintain it in your diet. Okay, regardless, I would like to point out here, B12 and D needs to be tested regardless of your predispositions to anything. Even if genetically you're not prone to it, our food does not give us a lot of vitamin B12 and D when we need it. Maybe one day or 2 day you might end up taking more. You won't take it on a daily basis. So here, blood test for vitamin B12 and D is very essential. However, let's look at the type of genotype that you could have as a risk factor. So if you have A type of genotype, then there is no significant reduction in the absorption of B12. But the G allele is the one that puts you at a risk. Okay, so whether you have GG or GA, there is a reduction in absorption. So in this case, you need to increase the bioavailable forms of B12 along with certain foods that help in increasing the absorption. So usually vitamin B12 absorption is increased by consuming foods that are rich in calcium. Also things like pepper or piperine extract is helpful in increasing the B12 absorption in the body. Okay, so foods that are rich in calcium as well as B12 need to be increased on a daily basis, and supplement only if you are deficient is required, otherwise it's not needed. What could be the probable consequence or deficiency symptoms of B12? It is mostly related to your nervous system. So if you have any numbness and tingling in hands and feet, headaches, feeling tired or fatigued, weakness, memory fogging, these all are the hallmark symptoms of vitamin B12 deficiency. So make sure that you check out for the genetic predisposition and make changes accordingly. Now, vitamin D, we know, is the sunshine vitamin, right? Your body can synthesize vitamin D unlike any other vitamin. Now, apart from vitamin D, there is a vitamin called vitamin K, right? It is synthesized in your gut. So vitamin D is one important vitamin because it is not only associated to your bone health, but also many other areas in your body which a lot of people don't know. So deficiency of vitamin D can also cause imbalances in your hormones, whether it's testosterone or estrogen, progesterone. It can also cause problems in your liver, in your kidney, in your heart. It could lead to the onset of asthma or even depression for that matter. It affects your brain. So vitamin D becomes very important to check every year, at least once every year, and at the same time consume food sources that are either fortified for vegetarians if you cannot consume egg yolks, etc., But for non-vegetarians, you can consume egg yolks, liver, meat, etc., which become the major sources of vitamin D. But regardless of all of that, you need to make sure that exposure to sunlight every day in the morning, when the sunlight is at least 40 to 50 degrees up from the horizon, you need to take it. 90% it comes through your eyes, but also from your skin. So you can prevent health issues associated to your bone or inflammation, autoimmune related depression, and certain cancers if you just make sure that your vitamin D is normal or it is reinstated at least. Okay, so this is all the treatment, etc. The gene associated with vitamin D is the GCG. Okay, so usually people who carry a risk genotype, in this case, the G allele again is the one that is responsible for risk of vitamin D not being absorbed or transported well in your body. So people with deficiency risks definitely have to get it checked and reinstated. But people who don't have a deficiency risk, like I said, vitamin B12 and D, you have to get it checked regardless, because even if you don't have a deficiency risk, if you're not consuming food sources with vitamin D and you're not even getting sunlight for vitamin D making in the body, you're regardless going to end up with deficiency, right? So just take care, because these two vitamins are very, very important to your health as well as to your overall mental health. Okay, so if you carry the risk variant GG and GT, it is hampered the transportation of vitamin D. The TT variant is a protective allele, so you don't have an issue here. Okay, so these two are the main nutrients, but otherwise, every micronutrient, whether it's vitamin or mineral, has a certain allele, risk allele, as well as a protective one. If you carry a protective allele, it's good for you, but you have to maintain it regardless in your diet. Okay, any doubts so far? I think let's take doubts before going to the next chapter. So we are on, any doubts so far? We are on the 5th chapter. So good, we are well in time. It's not even 11. All right. Okay, thank you so much. Great. Now moving on to genetic predisposition to diseases. When we talk about predisposition, what do you understand? That you are prone to getting it. When we talk about genetic predisposition, it means on the basis of your genes that you have inherited, the chances of you developing it. So this, when we talk about it in, in these terms, we talk about nature versus nurture. Okay, nature is what you're born with. You cannot change. It is mostly to do with everything inside of your body in terms of your DNA, which represents everything that is on the outside. So that's your nature. But when it comes to nurture, it is about everything that influences you, whether it is your diet, your lifestyle, or the household that you're born in. Okay, so this, this debate between nature versus nurture has been ongoing for quite some time. So many people believe that, let's just say here there is an example. So if there is a person who tries to be nice all the time, who tries to control her anger, but she has a predisposition because her parents are, let's say, ill-tempered. Okay, so it's said that even if no matter how much she tries to be nice, she will end up snapping. Okay, but on the other hand, some people say that if she surrounds herself with good people, or she has been raised in groups or in peer situation where let's say she's gone to a hostel or she's living somewhere else, right? Even if her parents are ill-tempered, let's say that her upbringing was done by grandparents and she does have a good upbringing where people have been calm around her, so that nurture, despite having parents who are ill-tempered, she would still be able to maintain her calm even if her parents snap at her. So that is a simple example of nature versus nurture, where what you surround with, your upbringing, your habits, etc., they do change or suppress certain genetics in your body, while some believe that your nature is everything. Okay, so this particular concept has been understood quite a bit even in twins, where twins had been raised in two completely different environments with two completely different food habits. So now what do you understand from twins? They have a similar genetic makeup, right? But now let's just say my twin is in a place where, she is probably eating more junk food, and I am in a place or in a household where we eat more of vegetables and fruits, and I don't have processed foods at all, and I'm maintaining my physical activity. Now both of us have a similar genetic makeup, which means you might think that, since we have a similar genetic makeup, we would probably be the same, even if whatever she eats. But when you think about the environmental influences, you would say, yes, since her environmental influences are such, certain genes that even I may carry as a predisposition, let's say both of us carry a predisposition for diabetes, but my lifestyle is better. But her lifestyle is bad because she's been gorging on, processed foods, having a bad physical activity. Her chances of developing diabetes or obesity, let's say 20 years after we meet, I will see that I'm completely different physically from her, right? So this is nature versus nurture, although both our natures are the same because our DNA is exactly similar, but her nurture is different. So these studies have been done on twins over, longitudinal studies have been done right through, let's say, teenagehood to their adulthood, where their choices, their environment has been checked, and how it influences their genetic expression has been seen. And that's the reason why we say that nurture does influence a person despite the nature that they carry. Okay, so in certain cases, if genetically you are prone to, let's say, cancer, does that mean that the person will definitely end up with cancer? No, because certain cancers, yes, the chances, let's say BRCA1, BRCA2. Have you heard of those genes? BRCA1, BRCA2, right? So BRCA1, BRCA2 usually are to do with breast cancer and ovarian cancer. Now let's just say that there is a parent, she has suffered from breast cancer, let's say. So it's obvious that if the daughter undergoes a test and if she does show positive for breast cancer, it does put her at a higher risk, which means she will have to get her a mammogram done, once every few years or once every year. But does that mean she will definitely end up with breast cancer? No, because her lifestyle influences or environmental influences also play a major role. Certain genetic issues, okay, there's an example here like Huntington's disease. Now Huntington's disease, definitely, even if you carry a gene variant, there is 100% possibility of the person ending up with Huntington's disease one generation after the other. That's why, certain genetic predispositions are so strong in the family. Certain you will observe in some families that one after the other, right from the grandparents to children, they have certain genetic trait that is strongly passed, right? So certain genetic predispositions are stronger, but overall, when we have checked the number of diseases as opposed to how many get expressed, 40% of the 560 diseases with cognitive, that is your brain related disorders, being the most influenced by genetics. So here at least 40% usually get expressed, but there is still 60% that do not, right? So predisposition completely depends on the kind of disease that is in question. Also, it depends on the environmental influences and how much does that environment influence the prevention of that disease is concerned. Okay, so basically what the predisposition talks about is just because you carry a gene does not mean you will end up with that disease, but at the same time, because you don't carry a disease in your genetics does not exempt you from it either, because your lifestyle environment plays a very important role. I have personally seen some people who have developed cancer later in life, but when you look at the family history, there has been none, right? So in that case, it makes you question what exactly happens in your body, how these mutations come up, how exactly your genes express themselves that are sometimes independent of your genetics. So your body is constantly changing every 30, every 35 days. The food that you consume plays a very important role. You remember there was this statement we'd seen in one of the chapters, you are what you eat. Do you know why do we say that? Because every 32 to 35 days, your cells keep replenishing themselves, and mostly with the foods that you consume. Right? I have said this before. If you consume a burger for, let's say, 20 days, you will start experiencing your skin dulling. You will find that you are aging very quickly. You will find your gastrointestinal, symptoms are all, through the roof. But instead, when you start following a diet, let's say even for 5 days, that is clean, you will start experiencing, the changes almost immediately. Because just like earlier, I answered a question, your body detects these changes. Your body registers these changes almost immediately and gives you the reaction or signs to tell you either you're going right or you're going wrong. Okay, so listen to the signs that your body gives you. So predisposition could be responsible for certain diseases. But if you see that you're predisposed to certain metabolic disorders, let's say diabetes or, obesity is, of course, the simplest one that we talk about, but let's say diabetes or cardiac disorders, you can still take it up on you to make sure that you are correcting your lifestyle and diet in order to match up or help you align with your genetics. Okay. So usually this is what is uh, the basis of predisposition. Let's look at certain diseases or disorders that could be hereditary. Now, hypertension alongside, of course, diabetes and cardiovascular disorders, since hypertension is studied mostly under cardiac disorders only, because it leads to cardiac disorders later on, it does affect 1 billion people globally, right? And it is responsible for 7.6 million premature deaths. Now, this is alarming because, of course, when we think about hypertension, BP to, ज़्यादा होता है, ज़्यादातर लोगों का होता है. But this is not talking about just because your BP is, let's say, 140 by 90, you will end up with, it being fatal. No, because hypertension can definitely be controlled before it reaches to a point where it leads to cardiovascular disorders. Because when we talk about hypertension, what exactly is happening inside your body? Your blood is flowing under pressure, right? Which is the reason why certain vasodilators are given in order to make sure that it flows, with a proper, pressure. So in this case, when a person has uncontrolled hypertension, let's say for years together, there is a chance of developing atrial fibrillation. Okay, atrial fibrillation or AF, for that matter, even issues like, left ventricular hypertrophy, which is enlargement of the left ventricle of the heart, happens on prolonged hypertension. If people tend to ignore their blood pressure, अच्छा ठीक है BP है वो कम होता है बढ़ता है, it keeps happening. If they keep ignoring it and if it becomes much, on a prolonged period, it does lead to heart related ailments, because LVF, that is left ventricular hypertrophy, sorry, LVH, or AF, that is atrial fibrillation, can lead to SCD, which is sudden cardiac death. And I'm sure nowadays you all hear a lot about it, right? It is different from heart attack. Sudden cardiac death is not like your heart attacks. Heart attacks, at least you can save a person through surgery or whatever. Sudden cardiac death is an electrical malfunction. It has nothing to do with, your blood vessels being choked up, which usually happens in heart attacks. So when it comes to SCD, it happens immediately and it is very fatal. So people with hypertension need to be very, very careful, because certain symptoms, apart from, of course, elevated blood pressure, and people get angry very easily, but headache, dizziness, impaired vision, failing memory, these are symptoms that tell you that it has gone too far. So treatment is usually with, of course, antihypertensives, that is ACE inhibitors, beta blockers, etc. But also through diet, like a DASH diet, it does help. And surprisingly, you would know, as per genetics, if you carry a particular gene, okay, variant for MTHFR, you can actually reverse hypertension within 12 weeks. Not reverse exactly, but the systolic, which is the above part of your blood pressure, can reduce by 13 mm of mercury, okay, within 12 weeks of consumption of riboflavin. Riboflavin is nothing but vitamin B2, like we discussed in the last class, right? So the allele that is responsible where it will help is the T allele. So if you carry the genotype TT, the supplementation with riboflavin 1.6 mg per day for 12 to 16 weeks will help you lower your blood pressure up to 13 mmHg, right? Which is really amazing. So in these cases, people don't have to take medications, right? But when it comes to CC and CT, it will not help. So in this case, a person with hypertension will have to follow a strict diet, reduce sodium in all forms, processed packaged foods, as well as table salt, switch over to certain salts that have lesser sodium amount, like, the mountain salts that we have, while maintaining iodine in the diet. Okay, so riboflavin rich foods are here. Moving on to cholesterol, people who carry a risk variant for cholesterol usually are not able to metabolize fat or cholesterol that easily. And you are aware that your body produces cholesterol, right? Where is it that your body produces cholesterol? Which is the place? Which is the place that your body produces cholesterol? Perfect. So Abhijit sir says liver, which is true. So your liver is the place which produces cholesterol on a daily basis. Now, a lot of people say that, if in case you're taking eggs, you should avoid yolks altogether, which is not true. It is actually villainized for no reason. It is only in the case of a person that has hypercholesterolemia, where cholesterol is really very high, where we say external cholesterol is not required. Your body anyway produces cholesterol, right? So here, cholesterol is produced for a reason, and it is good for your body. You need some amount of saturated fat. But when there is abnormal cholesterol, there is high triglycerides, high cholesterol, total cholesterol, bad cholesterol is high. That is called dyslipidemia or hyperlipidemia. Okay, that happens if you carry a gene where your body is not able to metabolize enough cholesterol. Okay, so usually the gene that is identified here is LPL. Two SNPs means there are two kinds of polymorphisms or single nucleotide polymorphisms that could lead to this particular enzyme, that is lipoprotein lipase, to be produced less. What is lipase? Understand from the name, so it's easier. Lipase is something that breaks down fat. So now obviously if this is not working that well, or if it's not produced well, the fat won't break down, which means there would be free floating triglycerides in your system, which could show high in your blood test. So the recommendations obviously has to be low of saturated fat, increase unsaturated, make sure that there's mobility, exercise in order to maintain your cardiovascular health. In this case, sometimes even along with MTHFR gene as well as other genes, even FPO, FABP2 is checked. Also, the gene that is responsible for your vasodilation, right? When we spoke about epinephrine, it also helps in increasing cardiac output. Okay, so that is also very important, and it is always checked side by side. Okay, so other than that, avoiding processed and bakery foods, etc., avoiding smoking. So these are other lifestyle changes. And diabetes, we've also discussed in the chapter of clinical nutrition, is of two types, type 1 and type 2. It's characterized by three main symptoms: polyuria, polyphagia, and polydipsia, which means frequent urination, frequent hunger, and frequent thirst. Okay, so when it happens in that way, you need to get your blood sugar checked. But in certain cases where you're suddenly feeling more thirsty, and you're having excess urination, you don't have to be alarmed. Sometimes if you drink a lot of water also, you keep having frequent urination, so it does not have to mean that you have blood sugar issues, but you need to get it checked, especially if you do have a family history of diabetes, and a strong history at that. And I'll tell you something that's surprising. Whenever I have counseled, I've observed one thing, that the if diabetes was not diagnosed in their family, right? Now, if I tell you that no, my mom and dad, they didn't have diabetes, I am talking about the diagnosis. I'm not talking about genetics. Genetics is what you will know only when you get the test done, right? So a lot of people, they are like, pretty chilled out when it comes to eating sweets, and lifestyle thoda sedentary bhi hai to chalega, because मेरी family में कभी diabetes था नहीं, right? That does not mean that your genetics do not carry that particular risk variant. So unless you get it done, you will not know if you are predisposed or not, right? Maybe your parents had a better lifestyle. Maybe they were successfully able to prevent diabetes, even if they carried the gene and passed it on to you. But then now, if your lifestyle is bad, the gene will definitely be expressed, whether your parents had it diagnosed or no, right? Or whether it was expressed in them or not. Okay, so this is how diabetes usually works, because it's not just genetic, it is also lifestyle induced. So even if you don't carry a genetic risk, does not mean you are, exempt from developing it if your lifestyle is, all really bad. So diabetes usually happens. Type 1, is insulin dependent because your body does not produce insulin. When it comes to type 2 diabetes, usually it happens with the onset of obesity also. The person is obese along with other lifestyle related inadequacies. It does lead to the onset of type 2 diabetes. In some pregnancies, after gestational diabetes, it leads to full blown type 2 diabetes, depending on the person's genetics. So other than that, there are other symptoms as well, where glucose is leaked into the urine. It's called glycosuria. There is extreme fatigue. And in some cases, there